Hey guys, it's Ariaa from TLC Next Reveal. Welcome back to my channel. May 7th, are you guys my BFFs on May 6th? I sure hope so. So, yesterday, we were talking about Kody and Robin's reaction to Garrison Brown's death, and lots of you had a lot to say in the comments, and we kind of didn't get through all of what occurred in the show. So in this video, I just want to touch on a few pieces of information that were learned from this video, from this latest episode of SisterWives. And I want to discuss with you some of the consequences of being a public family that has a reality show that capitalizes on their conflict and their family drama in order to generate ratings and revenue, and have contracts with TLC, and what the consequences are for the children that become kind of the collateral damage when you're and you are, you're not even 10 years old, and your parents make a choice to go on reality TV and make you the face of a lifestyle that's illegal. Try to think about what kinds of effects that has on you as you move forward in life. Imagine being 8 or 10 years old and your dad says he is going to use his family to become the public image of polygamy. This is an illegal culture. It's an illegal crime. It's a felony. It's a felony in all the states except Utah now. But even so, it's a felony in Utah under certain situations, and it's a felony in the federal government. The reason being is that it's the exploitation and the trafficking of women into relationships with men, and the women are utilized as currency in cattle. Essentially, they're bartered between men, sometimes given, and the more men, the more women that the men possess. The higher up they are in their leadership, and what becomes of the women is that they are frequently overlooked. They are being utilized for the sole aim of producing children, and they're having kids so that they can grow the size of the cult. And Mormon fundamentalism is the largest segment of polygamous groups or polygamous society in the United States. And it's illegal, and it's damaging, and it's considered to be damaging by the World Health Organization, by the UN Amnesty International. All these groups that are considering the civil rights and the damage done by polygamy have said that it's not a good system for women or for children, and even for some of the men who grow up and get ostracized and kicked out. So let's say you're a child and your family decides that they're going to toss out the privacy, and they're going to toss out living in the shadow, and they're going to make you a face of an illegal lifestyle, a criminal lifestyle. Because not only is polygamy a felony, but there's a lot of criminal activity that goes on in these cults that we've seen that goes on all over the internet. We hear about stories all the time about these men that get arrested for for tax fraud, welfare fraud, labor trafficking. And the most well-known certainly is Warren Jeffs, who's still in federal prison. And then put yourself in the shoes of a child that's forced out of your house in Utah. Your parents deceive you and tell you that your father was going to be arrested for being a polygamist, which was never going to occur. Your father then sues the state of Utah in federal court. He attempts to get polygamy overturned. He becomes an advocate to try to get polygamy decriminalized, but he doesn't want to make polygamy legal. You guys, he only wanted it decriminalized because if it was legal, it would mean that the women would get their rights. Women would be able to obtain multiple marriage licenses. They would have the same access and equity to rights. The children would theoretically have to have child support. The dads would no longer have the right to exploit the welfare system. They would also, be required to be on the birth certificates because they would be wedded and they didn't want it legalized. They want it decriminalized because they don't want to go to prison. But they also still wish to have the access to the exploitation facet of how they game the system. So you're a child. Your dad is the face. Your moms become the face. And your moms are doing it. But they don't really. They're doing it reluctantly, because the women in this case have been brainwashed since the time they were born, that they have to do this for the purpose of getting into heaven and there is no way that they can attain heaven unless they marry a man who has more than one wife. So if you were a woman, you would not do this unless you knew that you could possibly gain access to the celestial kingdom. It's the only way that you could talk a woman into doing this. And usually the only way you're going to get a woman to do this is by indoctrinating them from birth, and then informing them from their childhood that they should be a polygamist or a plural wife. And the show became a phenomenon, and it was very harmful to victims of polygamy. Because it made those victims that were actually getting hurt in polygamy, it made it more difficult for them to obtain justice. That made it more difficult for other victims from the cult that the Browns originated from to be heard seriously in court. Some of Kody's friends managed to get away with some pretty shitty shit. Let's just say Kyle Henderson is one. And there's been a lot of cover-up of what the real cult that they originated from was doing. There's been a lot of information that was never revealed. And over the years, lots of that information has come out. You know, we know that Christine's grandfather was killed. He didn't just die. He was killed by Val Laren's clan. Her grandpa didn't only end up in jail for polygamy. He and his buddies were involved in young children trafficking, and her grandfather had taken children as wives, 13, 14-year-olds. So there is a lot that's been left underneath that they still to this day do not speak of. They also do not speak of the fraud of Owen Alred. They do not speak of the brethren from their church who have gone to jail for SA of children, and they've wasted much time attempting to deflect that the AUB is different from the other groups, even though they are. So that's the structure that you're getting. These children become public. One is to deliberately mislead the public regarding who the ABAUB are to attempt to get this decriminalized. And 3, because your dad's an egomaniac and he wants to be known. And then after he does that, the only way that TLC will take up your show is if your father marries a new wife. And McKelty exposed this, and McKeely will deny alongside admitting this, but then also deny that Robin came into the family for the sake of the show. So essentially she'll tell them, no, my dad was already seeing someone before we got the show. He wasn't. And the only way they would approve the show as a series is if it traced the path of my dad with a new wife. Now Robin was already present, they say. But was she because Kody's initial introduction actually to the mainstream media was approximately 2008 when he did a AA interview with the BBC with him and Christine, and they visited his home, and at that point there was no Robin, and it was that interview with the BBC. And in addition to Christine's work with Principal Voices, which was an advocacy group to make polygamy the norm, who were other women who were of polygamy, and they said yes, Christine's family must be on the show. The catch was, they did not necessarily have much going on within their family. They had been married for many years, and they were quite interested in seeing what it was like to bring in a wife. So in comes Robin, that's the truth. And from there on, your whole life is public domain. Everything that transpires with your dad. The influx of new babies, your dad's quote-unquote phony investigation, where he was never in jeopardy of being investigated or going to jail in the state of Utah. If he was, why then would TLC have produced My 5 Wives, which was from the same cult? And you're always running around because your dad is fleeing from the law, because it's a felony to be this in this lifestyle. And it's a felony because there's coercion here, where the dads or the patriarchs are complete control over the women. The women have no legal rights, and there's a lot of manipulation, and there's a lot of doctrine that's used to keep the women compliant. And the women are taught to keep sweet, and to be amiable, and to talk like robots, and say that they don't have feelings. And they're also taught they're not supposed to have feelings. And so you grow up as a child, not only on the show, but as a face of a criminal life. And then you're supposed to have kind of a normal childhood within that, even though your family's on TV. Oh, and by the way, Some of your worst and toughest moments are recorded for entertainment for TV. And as your parents get older and they make more money and more money, they begin fighting over money. They begin fighting over time. And your dad checks out, and he decides he just wants to spend all of his time with his youngest wife, who is 11 or 12 years younger than him. And so not only does your dad leave you, but then your dad takes the money that he's earning from the show, and he doesn't spread it around. He gives it all to his new wife. And then you see your dad have these relationships with his new wife's kids, who, by the way, he later adopts when you were never really a legitimate child for him. And then he moves in with her, and he leaves you, and he leaves your moms. And then your moms are the ones to have to clean up the pieces. And then all along, fake on television that they're a family, and they all care about one another. Couldn't be further from them reality. All while confessing all of the reality about the family. And then halfway through that, at the very end, your dad gives up, and he begins to drive out all of the wives. Or in polygamy terminology, it's referred to as putting the ladies out to pasture, because once a woman ceases to bear children, she is no longer considered necessary to the man, because the man's role is to fill the world with white babies for his kingdom. And if the women are not able to provide him with babies, they're out to pasture like an old cow. I think Owen Alred said that once in a while, behind the pulpit. So Kody relegated his wives to pasture, and they were supposed to just be like all the other polygamist wives that just did not complain, and they coped, except his lives got exposed to the real world, and they caught on. Now one of his wives, Janelle, came from the LDS mainstream religion, but the LDS faith and the fundamentalist faith, they have a lot of the same doctrine, and therefore most individuals who convert into the FLDS literally come from the LDS due to that shared doctrine. Now folks in the LDS church will get highly upset if you say they use the same books and they use the same doctrines, but it's the truth. And although the public church has condemned polygamy for over 100 years, it doesn't mean that polygamists and LDS individuals don't intermix all the time. And Janelle converted because she already had that foundation of the LDS faith. It wasn't a difficult conversion because when you go into the history of the LDS church, you find out all the leaders were polygamists. And to truly practice the faith the way it was originally supposed to be practiced, you're supposed to practice it like Joseph Smith, who was a scam artist. So that's your childhood. Okay? And then after your parents broke up, you're an adult, a young adult who is, but you're newly starting out, and your mom has attachment, and she wants to ensure to take care of you, and she isn't going to throw you out. And like many loving children, many loving mothers, they assist their offspring. They permit their college children to live with them. But then your dad makes it his decision that he is going to utilize the drama with you as his amusement for the theatrics of a show. And thus, because he desires to have ratings for a show, you become his prey, you become his foe. You're held responsible for destroying his marriage to his wife. You're held accountable for intercoming between the marriage. Your mom is blamed for siding with you. You're called a narcissist. You're called a jerk. Your dad tells you he doesn't want to speak with you any longer. Your stepmom says you're unsafe. Your stepmom plays your dad against you and convinces your dad that you're evil and wicked and vile because you're out in the real world. And then beneath all of that is that you are consuming alcohol, which is forbidden by their religion, even though they all drink. And your stepmother feels that that's wicked and evil, even though now she drinks on television. And so, because your stepmother and your dad determine you are not safe, even though you're not, although the majority of your siblings have been drinking, but you're becoming the recipient of your dad's anger. Your dad makes your struggle with him a plot for the series, and he does not address the struggles he has with other kids, like your brother Dayton, who's experiencing the same issues with your dad. But your dad guards that fight with Dayton, and he takes all of his anger and frustration out on you, and you're made to come on to a show that you don't even want to be a part of because you're in the National Guard. You're trying to establish your own life. You don't want to be associated with polygamy, and in fact, you leave the faith and at one point joined the real mainstream church, rejecting your family's faith and denying it by becoming mainstream LDS. Nobody on the show ever talks about that. You technically become LDS. They only make it look like every kid that B tries to become LDS gets rejected by the church. So that's your life. And then your dad rejects you. He's bullying you for 3-4 seasons, making you appear like are the Antichrist and evil, and you're going to infect everyone and get everyone murdering everyone because you enjoy going out and having to do a job in between while your dad gets CO from your adopted sister, and he never criticizes her. And then after all those years and years and years of warring you, you surrender. And you say to your dad and to Robin, you can have him. We don't need a dad anymore. We're grown adults. But it's not true, because even until your dying day, you still wanted that relationship with your dad. But your dad used your trauma, and he made you the scapegoat, and he deflected his bad behavior onto you, and he projected all of his negative behavior onto you. He made you think you were the bad one, when in fact, your dad was the bad one. And you've been on a show like that since you've been 10. The criminal face life forced to struggle to assimilate into that life. Not cope getting bullied in school, somehow figure out a way to become part of the mainstream church. Be able to graduate from high school, enlist in the National Guard, and get a pretty successful smooth transition into life without a problem until you're dying by killing yourself. And all the while you're fighting your family is still taping a show, and their entire drama continues to unfold in front of the masses. And it's under these premises why some individuals that watch the show have a very hard time with the continuation of SisterWives, because under this there's a tale about the children that are being lost in the mix, whether we want to accept it or not. And there's stories about the kids that didn't request to be public. Their lives were not requested to be part of a show. Their problems, their parents were not required to be present, and their mom was. And dad, both of them chose to tape the argument regarding you people. Now, your mom stood up for you, but she still taped it, and it was likely tough on everybody involved. And then once you died, a lot of people thought that your parents would regard this as like that sign that you guys, this is too much. And since your last text messages are to crew members and show people, and you're saying, I want to hate you, but I can't. I miss those days. I miss the good times. Something like that. And your dad then appears on a show after you're dead and states, I didn't have a chance to say anything, but you texted your dad the night that you passed away, and your dad did not reply. He could have, but he didn't. And they'll never say that on the show, or that your friends want the show to be canceled, because they realize it hurt you. And there are still family members that despise people like me, who don't want to cover up the damages of polygamy and just want the truth to come out. That's the structure of what this whole new section of SisterWives is under. Okay? And what we saw on the episode was honesty from Janelle. To some extent, she talked candidly about his alcohol problem. She talked candidly about the suicide, which was very difficult. Talking about that conversation in a public manner could save someone, but also it might really save other individuals in polygamy. If you also talked about how polygamy and being open polygamists, and the show led to the mental illness in the family. And I don't want to state that it was solely Garrison, because I feel Garrison's just a symptom here of something larger, and I'm relieved that they're beginning to discuss mental illness, because that is what they've been saying. But they also, because they are Mormon fundamentalists, do not believe in medication for depression or anxiety. They also struggle with how to work with psychiatrists. Because their creed and their constituents instruct them not to see the psychologist or visit the psychiatrist. And much of it is you are instructed that the mental illness is somehow a frailty in yourself, that you have to bottle up. And on the episode you watched, you saw some of the individuals talk openly and that he had died by suicide. Robin didn't tell her, she wouldn't tell her, because there is also a thinking within your culture that if you die in this manner, you are no different than someone who takes a life. And so there is shame. And then your father, who was not present for all of that, all of those years, and left you, and bullied you, and all of those things that did not benefit your mental health, and you began drinking during the same time that your dad began bullying you, and falling into harder and more sadness, and your family breaks up, and your dad's bullying you on the show, and you're drinking more, and you're trying to deal, and your family knows that you're coping with anxiety, and you're suffering from depression, and you're likely not the only one in the family experiencing this, and the entire time they continue to film, and that's why many people quit watching the show. And if you were one of them, I understand. I understand it's not fun for me to cover this show. Covering the story. I hate it because there's no way that to talk about this in a fashion that is actually super sensitive to what occurred, but also open enough so that people are aware that what occurred to Garrison occurs to a lot of young men in polygamy and a lot of young women due to the lack of knowledge about psychiatric medications and the brainwashing they receive about not visiting doctors, not visiting psychiatrists, not visiting psychologists. Although they do some sort of therapy, they do like family therapy that is sort of relational. They don't usually do therapy that involves something about mental health. It is more like, I am having an issue in a marriage, so they attend marriage therapy, which is completely different than if you attend cognitive behavioral therapy, EDMR, or all the various types of therapies you can receive with a psychologist or psychiatrist. And because they also have stigmas about taking medications, and then you're also in the military, there's likely a dance there too about feeling like if you take care of it, or acknowledge it, you're being weak, and so alcohol is a coping mechanism. But because you grew up in a cult, you never learned about moderation. And so you're told your entire life that if you drink, you're going to hell. So you might as well just keep drinking, because what's one if you're gonna do? So you might as well go ahead and go all in. And that's another issue that occurs within polygamy. A lot of individuals that depart end up, particularly young men, on alcohol and drugs. And then on top of having the trauma of being excluded by their fathers, having been neglected child, being forced to have to do with poverty, which all of them did prior to the show. And then you put the additional layer on top of sharing this all on television, and it was a recipe for disaster. I hope that as you go on, if you do view that, you approach this as a cautionary example of what could happen when something may have begun for the right reasons, at least in their minds, can turn into something nasty, corrupt, and greedy. Because while they're all bickering about money and who does what, and all of this stuff from the divorce, we're just supposed to think that these children are just somehow completely fine with no stinging, no hiccups. And how many times did we hear for years, Janelle reports, my kids are great, everything's fine, everything's going great. But then, in private, we now know that he was struggling for years. The whole time he was being bullied by his dad. She now says he was struggling, so were they really great? No. Is Gabriel great today? No. Are any of these kids huge? No. They all do have trauma. And now this trauma is going to be part of the show. Yesterday, I talked to 2 ex-members of the AUB. One of them, you see in my comments. Her name, her face, her member name is Ellen. And there is another one, is Ellen is a fake name that is not really her name. She doesn't want to be publicly known. And then Kristen Decker is Christine's aunt. and a former cult member as well, and I asked her why after all that Kody made that child endure. Why did he have a say in where his son was buried? He was estranged, and Garrison was a grown man. And my personal opinion is that if you are not involved with someone's life when they're around, you shouldn't be able to have any voice in what occurs to them after they've died. If you come from an estranged family, then you'll get it. I am from arranged. I am estranged from my birth parents, and I would never want them to have any control over my funeral if I die today. So wanting him to have a say when there's an estrangement just feels repulsive to me, because I view this entire system as a cause, and then he's also acting victim and the martyr and the hero, right? Because I'm gonna bury him. And so I question them, why would he have a say? And it's easy because in the beliefs of the fundamentalist, even though they all are not included in the belief, the indoctrination is deep, and Kody is still the head of the household. And even though Janelle and Kody are divorced and they don't reside together, they aren't spiritually divorced. And since she still clings to her belief and she still clings to her faith, and she's not gone through that spiritual divorce, now she feels that she is still married to Kody spiritually. And she also feels that if she must make it to heaven and she wishes to see him again, Garrison that is, she must remain married to Kody. But in order to remain married to Kody, that means that she doesn't get to date anymore. She must remain single for the rest of her life. So Janelle deferred to Kody because he's the priesthood head, even if they're not married according to their religion. He's the priesthood authority, even if they're not members of it. But it's indoctrinated in them, and the men take over whether or not they have any relationship with a child. And then Kristen told me that the cremation is not something that they do in the LLDS often. More often than not, they would prefer a burial. And so cremation is frowned upon. And so even though Janelle mentioned that this was what Garrison wanted, and they came to an agreement that they would do it, she said, Kody and I agreed. I suspect why he wants to bury him is because of the belief system that they have to be buried now. Whether or not he received the full ashes is a whole other thing. I did ask someone else who's had a stepfather pass away and had some of their sister moms or whatever, like Ellen, who grew up with, I think, 3 or 4, I don't recall, 2 or 3 moms, three moms. As I recall, one of the moms died. So they scattered ashes among several of the sisters. And so each sister and some of the adults had a portion of the ashes. And so Ellen said, well, maybe Kody only has part of the ashes, not all of the ashes. Maybe Janelle has some, maybe some of his siblings have some, and he's getting a part of the ashes. And those are the ashes that are going to be buried. I don't know. You can bury an urn. That's something you can do. And you can do that at a cemetery, which is where he's buried. That urn is buried in Wyoming. So despite that Janelle on the show is living in a different state, not claiming to be married, knowing that Mary has encouraged her to get a spiritual lease, to my understanding, that hasn't happened. If it has, I hope it has. If she needs one, she shouldn't have to need one. But she yesterday posted on her Instagram that she still has her faith. So she still believes this, which means she still believes she is tied to Kody. And she believes that to stay tied to Kody means she will see Garrison. So now it almost seems like she may not disconnect from Kody because she wants to see Garrison on the other side. I hope at some point she realizes that if there is this heaven that she's hoping there is, that she doesn't need to stay in a loveless marriage, even if they don't live together and they live in separate states. She doesn't need to be psychologically tied to someone that doesn't deserve to be tied to her in any capacity. And under this whole backdrop of this whole long video I've just shared with you, the most shocking detail that's being left out of all of this is a truth that TLC will never admit ever. But on the night that Garrison died, Tim Given had texted a photograph to a group chat. Tim Given was the producer of the show, and he was on the show from the very beginning. He's the one that pitched the show to the family. He's the one that sought out the Browns. He was with them through all of it. He was going to prove everyone wrong, that polygamy wasn't like what they said. It was in the documentaries, and there was not harm to children. There was not harm to women. It was all consensual. He was going to prove them wrong. And on that final night, Tim sent a text message of a photograph of them playing paintball at Caleb's bachelor party when he married Maddie, and Garrison responded to that and responded directly to the photograph that Tim had sent. And that text message directed directly at Tim said, "I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days." That was to Tim Gibbons on the text message that were obtained through an FOIA via the Flagstaff police that I obtained. It is clear as day that he was talking to Tim, and Janelle contacted him because she was alerted by what he had sent to someone that they work with and was concerned about what he had said to somebody that they worked with, concerned about their jobs and concerned about their livelihood and also concerned about Garrison. And she reached out to him, and he told his mother that he saw the picture once it was texted to him. He thought it was a newer picture, and then he realized it was an older picture. And he got sad. His last moments of his life were thinking about the fact that he wanted to hate Tim Gibbons for what Tim brought into their lives, but at the same time, he wants to hate him. Tim also brought in opportunities they never would have had. Tim exploited a family that was poor, that was living in poverty, and had kids, were being and dealing with food insecurity. And when Tim came in and they became wealthy, and Tim became wealthy, they got to do things and go on trips, and they didn't have to worry about where the next food was going to come from, where their next meal was going to come from. They didn't have to worry about the hand-me-downs, the worn-out shoes, the no food in the cupboards. How are we going to pay the electricity bill? They had to stop. They didn't have to declare bankruptcy all the time. Many of them got off welfare, even though they were on welfare into like the 5th or 6th season. But his last night, his last text, related to SisterWives, was telling the producer of the show he wanted to hate him, and TLC will never tell you that TLC will never admit that he told Tim Gibbons, "I want to hate you, but I can't. I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days." Tim shared moments with them, right? With the family, and by sharing those moments, it meant that it was on TV. March 4th was the night that he died. He was found on March 5th in the morning. And Garrison had just gotten over the hardest season ever of SisterWives that went until the end of January into early February. And that entire time, Kody was berating him, abusing him verbally, mentally, psychologically to a national audience of millions of people. And his final text, "I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days, the days when it was fun, not these days today." And they knew and they know that that text message was sent to Tim. Janelle knows because she told the police. Kody knows because he was included on the text. Christine knows because she was included on the text. Robin would know because Dayton's included on the text. Logan knows because he was on the text. They know. And then, abruptly, they paused filming for a little bit. They picked up filming, right? Not long after, that's what we're seeing right now. Kody went on to film and reclaim and reframe the narrative. But you know what happened? Tim quit. He left the show, and they had to bring in a new producer to film. They had to bring in a new producer to do the talking heads. So almost all of the talking heads that you've seen even before this week were filmed after Garrison died, almost all of them. And they were filmed by a new producer because Tim quit the show after Garrison died. And after he got that text message, But the show went on. Christopher Poole took over. Tim handed over Puddle Monkey to Christopher P. Tim moved to Connecticut. The story of the family is, he got a different house. He moved. He needed a break from all of this. It's a really coincidental time to need a break. So the producer that brought you into this limelight and made the show and directed the show for all of these seasons quit after getting your text message about you hating him. Then you die. He quits. Your parents keep filming, but he quits because TLC needs to make a show, and they will never tell you that. So that's what's being left out on the cutting room floor. And if it angers you that I'm sharing, that I'm sorry, I don't want to burst your bubble, but there's damage here that shouldn't be overlooked. And I'm just going to make sure that it's out there because Garrison's voice, regardless of if the family hates me, and I know that they do, the truth deserves to be heard, and that the show is a root cause of the problem and the conflict, and they keep filming. So tell me what your thoughts are about this. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.